What's up guys, and welcome back to Moan Inc. If you guys are new here, well then, hello. My name is Erica, and it is a pleasure to have you joining us today on the channel. Because for today's video, as you can see from the title, and I presume why you clicked on the thumbnail, is a discussion of Elodie Harper's The Wolf Den trilogy. So before we can get into that, please do not forget to hit the subscribe button and the bell icon so that you know every single time I post in the future. And now that you have so kindly joined this nerdy community in this little corner of the internet, let's get into the review. So immediate spoiler alert is that you need to know I loved this series. Okay, so this is going to be a very biased book review. I wanted to let you guys know now that I am such a big fan of Elodie Harper and her work with the Wolf Den trilogy. But I should probably let you guys know, in case you haven't read the series, what it's about. In the first book, which is titled The Wolf Den, we are set in Pompeii at the brothel, which is an incredibly interesting premise because it follows the prostitutes that live and that work in this brothel, which, by the way, you can still go and visit in Pompeii today. It is still a standing building, which is absolutely amazing and fantastic for all of us history nerds, but I think as well for everybody else who goes. Surely it's fun for you guys. Maybe it's just me. That's okay, I guess. Anyways, that's where this book is set, and we follow the women who work in this brothel and what their lives would have been like at quite literally the lowest rung of society in Pompeii, which, by the way, in the ancient Roman world was viewed as like a backwater city. Throughout this book, we see the various ways that women can make money, like not only through the brothel, but also a lot of the prostitutes that work there end up outsourcing. They end up becoming musicians and performers and being invited to these very incredible stately homes. We then meet other women who are more so business women. How do they function in society? And what's really interesting about this book is just seeing the women come together and that sisterly bond that they have despite their unfortunate circumstances, not only with each other, obviously, where they work, but also with the pimp that technically owns them. So that's all book one, right? That's all in The Wolf Den, and I will absolutely not ruin it for you because that would be traumatic. So rolling into book two, which is The House with the Golden Door, we change from exploring the rights of women in this particular context. Specifically, obviously, we do meet other women, but we are focusing on the women in the brothel and them being slaves, being sex slaves in particular in this specific instance. And in the second book, we explore what it means to be a freed person in this society. So we move on from being a complete slave to now, okay, you've had your freedom bought for you, but what does that mean? Does that now mean that you are a regular person in society? Spoiler, it does not. And what are the laws and legalities that you're now confined to as a freed person? What are the reputations that you have to, hear about, that you have to accept that people think about you? What does that status look like? Sure, you're not under the thumb of your pimp anymore, but what does that mean? And also bear in mind all of the uncertainties that come with that position. That yes, you may have a patron who vouched for you, who got you out of the position that you were previously in, but now you're in still just as much of an unstable position. Where is your income coming from, right? How are you going to make sure that you remain with your patron for as long as possible before potentially having to move patrons? What if your patron gets bored of you? All of these issues that would have been prevalent in the ancient world are explored throughout book two. Now, book three is the newly released Temple of Fortuna, which this is the advanced copy. So I don't have the hardback yet, but I just plowed through the Temple of Fortuna, which will look like this, which is absolutely stunning. And what the final installment deals with is now that you're a freed person, now that you have some kind of stability and you have future stability, shall we say, offered to you on a silver platter, what happens when all of that comes crumbling down outside of your control? Because obviously this is set in Pompeii and I'm not ruining it for you, but that volcano has to pop at some point. We all know this. So that's what book three explores, right? We're going into that element of the history and we're going into that time period of finally when you have this moment of stability, when you're gaining the respect that you wanted in books one and two, now what does that look like when unfortunately the ancient gods is what they would have thought. The ancient gods are against you. So that's the series as a whole. But why, as a classicist, did I love it so much? For starters, obviously, the series is set in Pompeii, which is in of itself incredibly, incredibly thrilling, right? When you know how this kind of has to end, it very much closes in the action, but makes the action much more interesting, because part of you knows that none of this is going to matter in a few years, which I know is a really dark way of viewing it. But I think that that makes the story more fun. It makes it much more ancient, you know, because when you read ancient stories, like, we now know all the spoilers for them. So we don't read those stories for the what happens. We're reading for the how it happens. And I think that was kind of what I got out of this series, that knowing the volcano had to erupt was the what. But knowing how everything was going to happen up until that point was the real fun and the real joy that I got out of this series. Now, not only that, but there is so many nuggets of ancient knowledge that are thrown into these books that show me, and I think show everybody, just how smart Elodie is. Like, Elodie has done so much research and has packed these books filled with truths that would have come out of the ancient world. You know, whether it be ancient characters that we meet, so Pliny the Elder does play a role in all three of these books. What was said in his natural histories are explored throughout these books. We have not only those, but things that were mentioned in Pliny the Younger's letters, much later, obviously. He had written these letters as Pompeii was erupting to his friend, and he had sort of reflected on it and what was going on. And lots of the things that survive from those letters were used, especially in book 3. And obviously, the archaeology of Pompeii was so fun to see in these books. Mainly because what Elodie did with the archaeology was that she kind of used, well, she did use the brothel as her center, and then everything out from there, it wasn't totally made up. But, you know, the prostitutes, for example, when they go to these grand houses in the Wolf Den, those are loosely based off of the houses that survive, but they're not, you know, you're not walking into the House of the Veti or the House of the Faun, right? You're not walking into those spaces, but you are walking into these grand like houses that would have been incredibly similar to those, which I think was a really great way for Elodie to still get that, you know, sort of creativity with the book, that she's writing about these houses or these complexes that maybe aren't 100% because they're made up, and the characters that live there as well are fictional, that, you know, she's based off of maybe some graffiti. That's something that she did with actually all of the prostitutes. All of their names come from graffiti found in Pompeii. But the characters themselves are fictional. The houses that they live in are fictional, but do kind of set up in Pompeii the way that we see them now. And that was really, really fun and really engaging to read. I loved throwing myself onto the streets of this Pompeii and to see sort of where they're walking to, going to the baths, you know. And there are some people who, as I said with Pliny the Elder, that are real, and their complexes and their houses, or at least where we think that they were, are real. It's just that a lot of this stuff is fictional. And I think Elodie did a really good job of balancing both of those. Kind of like for us who knew the history, there were little things for us to cling on to, but there's so much fiction in there that you don't need to know the history in order to really enjoy it. Now, there are other things that are really interestingly explored. For example, birth control methods are explored in book 1. We then have fertility that's also explored in book 2, and so on and so forth. So things like that, when it comes to the ancient world, are explored, and the theories surrounding those in an ancient context, not in a modern context, just so that you all... just so that we're all aware, right? This is all like what they would think about infertility, what they thought about giving children to people. God, I sound like an old historian more and more every single day. Obviously, what I meant is, you know, like birthing a child for someone who, in the case of the ancient world, it would have been seen as for someone. Because when you have a child, you're solidifying your status within that person's life, but also you're solidifying your child status for that person. You don't have to be married to that person. It's just that, you know, you got to pick wisely. If you're in a position like the ladies are in the first book of this whole trilogy, you've got to be very careful of who you do that with, and that is explored throughout the book. And all of these elements, which are really interesting parts of history that are not widely explored on like a pop culture level, which I think is really fun to dip into with these characters. Now, I won't say too much about book 3, but what I will say about the series as a whole and the way it comes to an end is that this series is so unbelievably satisfying. That as you're reading it, there's so much drama, there's so much, oh my God, there are so many issues, like in every single book, whether it be large scale, small scale, family issues, legal issues, you know, whatever it happens to be, threats, blackmail. I mean, we have everything packed into these books. And getting to the final one, part of me was worried that Elodie might not be able to tie up all of the holes that I would necessarily want her to tie up, just because there were so many that were opened. But let me tell you, Elodie did it perfectly. Like, I have never been more satisfied reading a final book in a series where I really felt like everything came to such a beautiful close. Albeit maybe a slightly unrealistic close, because this is still fictional, and you know, there's still an element of like making this not a happy ending, I don't want to say that, but making it, you know, nice for the readers. Obviously, you don't want to read something that's doom and gloom like Game of Thrones all the time. And I think that there was so much doom and gloom throughout this series that when it came to the end that was as happy as Elodie could possibly make it for everybody, it was a wonderful way to close off the story. And I felt so satisfied saying goodbye to these characters in the way that Elodie let me, and in the way that I think, you know, she's let all of us come on the ride with these characters and finally put them to rest and given them the correct send-off that they deserve. I mean, genuinely, you guys, I don't think that I'll be able to find a series like this one again, or at least for a while, because the women that we meet, the men that we meet, the businesses that we see, the attention to detail, the attention to history, the perfect balance between fiction and nonfiction, the perfect balance between pulling in those historical source materials whilst not weighing down the narrative with them. I think it's going to be a really hard one to beat, I'll be honest. And I think that Elodie did a fantastic, fantastic job. Genuinely, if you guys have not read these books, it is a crime in my eyes, and you should have already read them, but it's never too late. It is never too late. You guys can find the links to each one of these books in the description below. So thank you guys so much for tuning into today's video. If you guys want any more Elodie Harper content, I do have a previous interview that I did with her years ago when she first launched The Wolf Den, and I will be uploading, I don't know when this comes out, but at some point around this video, I will be uploading a secondary chat with Elodie to discuss the whole series and discuss all of her decisions, because I just think that she did a brilliant job and she deserves all the space on my channel to discuss it. So you guys can find those videos linked in the description below to keep you guys busy, but we'll be seeing you next time with more videos here on Moan Inc. So I'll see you guys then.